Greetings, fellow Polonians and friends, and welcome to our POSSE EDU webinar. I'm Dr. Gene Sokolowski, POSSE EDU president, and our topic is Jewish Ingratitude to Polish Rescuers of Jews. By way of quick background, we at POSSE EDU are a 501c3 nonprofit educational organization, and our mission is to educate the American public accurately on key aspects of Polish and Polish-American history, culture, and relevant current events. Our guest is Mr. Jan Peczkis, whom many of you know for his insightful analyses of over 1,800 works by Jewish, Polish, and other authors on historical as well as contemporary Polish-Jewish interrelations. Jan's analyses of the Holocaust literature in particular reveal significant falsifications, misrepresentations, and material omissions about Poland and the Poles, which largely explains why Polish-Jewish relations remain problematic. So Jan, welcome, and thank you for being our guest speaker.
Oh, hi. Good evening.
Jan,
thank you so much for coming for the webinar.
Yeah, I think for our viewers now, what I'll do is I'll go to our cover slide for your presentation, and we'll address that. So if our viewers will bear with me, for 1 second, we're going to go to the main slide. Now, as you see here, there are 3 URLs for Jan's highly informative websites. And actually, this the first 2 for the websites. The third one, as you see, is a YouTube link. I'll address that momentarily. But in regards to the 2 URLs, the first website is a comprehensive online database titled Jews and Poles Database. And Jan's reviews are fully searchable with keyword phrase identifiers, as well as by author, book title, and year of publication. And his topic guide provides an extensive list of phrases, each of which directs viewers to answers of many common questions related to Polish-Jewish relations. Now, Jan's second website is titled Justice for Polish Victims of the Second World War. And this provides a comprehensive information on this topic under various categories, and it does so in a visually oriented format. And as you see there, there's a third URL, and this is we've placed our webinars on YouTube. We have the 5 previous webinars. This will also be placed on that link and other subsequent ones. So our procedure then will be as follows. First, we'll show Jan's slide. Second, while the slide is shown, I'll present 1 or more questions. And third, Jan will address the questions by discussing the slide or applicable slides in detail. So we'll go now to the first slide. Jan, so here we are in the Hebrew binary world of Jews and Gentiles. And as indicated here, some of us can even be considered as righteous. So 2 questions, one for this slide and one for the next slide. First, please explain why there is a hidden meaning in the term righteous Gentile that most people don't realize. And secondly, explain for us the irony behind the baseless criticism that Poles didn't do enough to save Polish Jews during World War II.
Okay, yes. So one thing, let me be clear about something. We talk about Jews not being ungrateful Polish rescuers. I don't mean all Jews. I know there are some Jews that are grateful to Poles for rescuing them, but that's expected. Poles are not beggars. Poles are not begging to be respected. Poles expect to be respected. And Poles demand respect. Besides, those Jews that are grateful are not the ones with the influence. They're not the one in academia, media, and the Holocaust establishment. It's the anti-Polish Jews that mostly are influenced public opinion and academia, media, and so on. Now, thing to realize, everywhere we hear this, I see this written all the time, the verse that is written on Yad Vashem. Whoever saves one soul, it counts as if he saved a full world. Sounds nice. Hear it all the time. That's for public consumption as a Yad Vashem. But there's another version we hardly ever hear. I didn't even know about this till recently. I read a lot, and I stumbled across it accidentally. It's a tribalist version. Whoever saves one soul of Israel, it counts as if he saved a full world. It's a small and vital change, a good way to put it. Totally changes the meaning of it. The first verse seems universal, and the second is tribalist. So really, in a sense, Jews are trying to appear more favorable to the public than they really are. And so, in a sense, Jews are hiding what they truly believe. So, or put another way, it's not quite truth in advertising, not quite kosher. But really the question is not which version is it, but which version actually shapes policy. You see, normative practice. It isn't about serving humanity, it's really about serving the Jews, the tribalist version. Notice the term righteous is not typically associated with all genocides. It's typically associated with the Jews' Holocaust. That's brought up on Google. You can look up terms. Righteous Gentiles, 54,000 some mentions. What about other genocides? Almost nothing. What about righteous people who saved people in other genocides? Hardly anything. Righteous Turks. For the Armenian genocide, a tenth as much as righteous Gentiles. Righteous Hutus in the Rwandan genocide, almost nothing. Righteous Cambodians, as an exact phrase, nothing. And on the left, you see the term bystanders. How often have we heard about this? It's always in reference to the Jews. There's whole books written about bystanders, always to the Jews' Holocaust. There's hardly anything about bystanders to say the Armenian genocide or the Gypsy genocide or the Rwandan genocide or other genocides. It doesn't exist. It's all Jewish-centered. So normative practice really supports the hidden, mostly hidden, tribalist version. Next slide. Okay, there is more. A lot of times, all this talk about how many Poles saved Jews. Sometimes Poles ask, how many Jews saved Poles? That's a good question. For example, during communism or when Jews had privileges and Poles did not, or during the insurrections against foreign rules, where Poles were hiding from the Russians who were going after them, things like that. Very hardly ever hear about that. And it's kind of ironic for Jews to be complaining that so few Poles save Jews. Now, what about Jews' own standards? Well, in the Palestinian Talmud, probably copying the Christian view, a person has a duty to risk his life to save somebody else's life. But get this, the main thing, the Babylonian Talmud, there is no requirement for a Jew to risk his life to save somebody else's life. Let's say it again. According to the Babylonian Talmud, there's no requirement, no such duty for a Jew to risk his life to save somebody else's life. And ironically, here Jews are complaining that the Goys did not save them, that so few Polish rescuers were involved. You never hear the end of it. It's like a dual morality. The Jews expect Gentiles to save them, but they have no such requirement of their own, according to their own moral code, the Talmud, to save others. It's a kind of dual morality like in the Talmud about gored oxen. If the ox belongs to a Jew, and the Goy's ox gores it, the Goy has to pay the Jewish owner money, the compensation, but it's the other way around. If it is the Jewish-owned ox that gores an ox that belongs to Goy, the Jewish owner doesn't have to pay. It's a dual morality. It's like Jews are a higher race. They're exempt from paying reparations for a gored ox, and they're also exempt from saving anybody else's life, but other people are not so exempt. It's kind of striking dual morality and being applied against Poles by those Jews who complain that so few Polish rescuers. Poles shouldn't be talking about the rescuers because there are so few of them. Oh my goodness. Yes. Next slide, please.
Now, Jan, in the next 3 slides, you show how Holocaust devotees try to prevent recognition of the efforts of individual Poles to save Jews. So the question is, explain why they are so intent on portraying Poles in a completely negative light, but portray Germans in a less negative light.
Well, there's actually, Gene, there's a whole bunch of different things going on. We hear all the time, 98% of Polish Jews were murdered. The Jews say nowhere else but in Poland was the Holocaust so successful, so complete, so devastating, and so total. The implication being that it's the Poles' fault that it was like that. And some Jews are more explicit about it, and they say Poland was Catholic, and because she was devoutly Catholic, therefore there was a lot of anti-Semitism, and because of that, supposedly there were fewer rescuers than anywhere else, and because there's many more betrayers, and that's why almost all the Jews were wiped out. That is a bigoted lie. What actually happened, it primarily had to do with German policies. Not all German occupation was equally the same all over Europe, and not all German policies against Jews were equally intense all over Europe, especially dealing with the SS control. That was the deciding factor. Where SS control was very high, like in Poland, almost all Jews were wiped out. In places where it was less strong, less severe, fewer Jews were murdered. And it didn't matter whether the population was very anti-Semitic or not anti-Semitic, however you measure it. It had nothing to do with any kind of account how few or how many rescuers there were, or how few or how many betrayers there were. It had to do with SS control and what the Germans did. That was the deciding factor. That's why Polish Jews were almost all wiped out. The intensity of the German occupation and the high degree of SS control. That was the decisive factor. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, yes. Who is Alexander Lados? Whoever heard of him? Oskar Schindler is a household word. Lados, whoever heard of him? A British author just wrote a book about him. He called it Holocaust's Most Audacious Rescue Operation. Forgotten story. Yes, its story was unknown. Why? Because the Jews don't want to publicize it. They publicize Schindler left and right, but 400 people, a million people have seen his movie. But Lados, Alexander Lados, who saved more Jews, is practically unknown. Lados gave thousands of fake passports that would make Polish Jews appear to be foreign citizens. And for some reason, it worked for a large fraction of them. And so thousands of Jews were saved by Alexander Lados, more than Schindler, but of course we never hear of them. And now what's further is a further irony, these constant Jewish complaints that Poles did almost nothing to help the Jews. Those exchange Jews, most of them were rotting in Bergen-Belsen. They died naturally there, not as Jews, but just because they were in a concentration camp, while the Western powers fiddled about what to do with these fake passports. They're the ones who should be blamed for the fact that Poles were not more effective in saving Jews, and not the Poles, as they usually are, always are. Next. Okay, think of Jan Maletka. He got a little publicity, and the Jews had a conniption about him. He was honored for bringing water to the Jewish arrivals at Treblinka. He had to sneak in near a train and bring a pail of water. Now, Germans usually shot such folks. He was shot and he died, but his brother was with him and managed to crawl away safely and report what happened. Now, the Jews raised a big stink, questioning the authenticity of this account and impugning his motive, especially Jan Grabowski. However, it's not just Grabowski. Grabowski has the full backing of the regular Holocaust establishment. They make him a kind of a hero. They stick up for him. They glorify him. And so they're all responsible for this kind of shenanigans. What they've done, all kinds of discounting him. But it was not just Maletka. Poles regularly risked their lives bringing Jewish Treblinka arrivals of water. Now, the accusation is made that Maletka required payment for it. Jews had to pay him for that. No evidence for that. Doesn't matter. It's all propaganda. It's not about evidence. And so some of these Polish rescuers did require payment. some did not. And so here again, the Jews are being two-faced. They're skeptical about Maletka, but they're never skeptical about the Western European rescuers. They're never skeptical about Schindler or the Danes. And they're never indignant, they're indignant, selective indignation, phony indignation about Poles taking money for saving Jews. In fact, Yad Vashem is a sham. Its policy disqualifies Polish rescuers who took money of any kind for saving Jews. Yet, as we shall see, Danes and Schindler were paid, and Yad Vashem turns a totally blind eye to that, see? A further irony, fugitive Jews sometimes required payment from other fugitive Jews. So it's nothing horrible about taking money to help somebody. Then, along with this, with Grabowski, Jews raised a big stink about the fact, oh dear, the peace government is politicizing the Holocaust. It's politicizing the rescue of Jews. Politicizing what? The Jews have politicized the Holocaust from the beginning. The Jews are must be the center of attention. Jews must be the center of the moral universe. Politicians must dance around them, perform rituals about how they remember the Holocaust. So of course there's a political aspect to it. Poles have to engage in political theater of a sort about how good they were to Jews. All nations have to engage in some kind of political theater about virtual signaling about how good they were to Jews during the Holocaust. The Jews created this situation and nobody else. And now they're complaining about it. Then we have a lot of times we hear the same thing over and over again. Well, you can't honor Polish rescuers because there were so few of them, and because Poles who denounced Jews far outnumbered those Poles who rescued Jews. That's not supported by a shred of evidence, but who cares? It's all propaganda, and it's stupid. Look at this. It's like saying we cannot honor Jewish Nobel Prize winners because there's so few of them. Or even better, we can argue there's many more Jewish misfits than there are Jewish Nobel Prize winners, using the same logic. Stupid logic. Both sets are equally stupid. Of course, it's entirely possible. It's much easier to be a misfit, Jewish or otherwise, than it is to be a Nobel Prize winner, Jewish or otherwise. There's going to be more of misfits than Nobel Prize winners. Likewise, it's entirely possible there's more denouncers than rescuers of Jews, because it's much easier to roll with the flow, be selfish, and to denounce the Jews than it is to defy a German authority and to rescue Jews and be brave and all that. Common sense. Not so common, unfortunately, especially when dealing with the Holocaust. Okay. Next slide.
So yeah, and in keeping with Jewish efforts to diminish and invalidate Polish efforts to save Jews, your next 4 slides focus on 2 individuals who may be accurately described as unapologetic anti-Polish historians. David Engel is professor of Holocaust and Judaic Studies at New York University, and Jan Grabowski was professor of history at the University of Ottawa and now teaches about Poles and Polish Jews during World War II. You point out that Engel accuses the Polish government in exile in London of suppressing the reports of the Polish underground about the unfolding genocide of Jews. So here's the question. Please describe for us what Engel and Grabowski have both done.
Okay, Engel and others have been saying that the Polish government in exile was really low-key, didn't really care about the Jews. A few Jews are even more provocative, saying that secretly it sympathized with the killing of the Jews, but didn't want to say it. A total asinine accusation, slanderous accusation. But what actually happened? A British historian named Michael Fleming looked at this and he says it was the British and American censorship that muted the response of the Polish government in exile. It wasn't because the Polish government was anti-Semitic or didn't care about the Jews. It simply was gagged by British and American censorship. So if the Jews have to get mad at anybody about it, they should be mad at the British and Americans, not the Polish government in exile. Next slide. Okay, none other than the German enemy respected the Poles more than the Jews today do. Goebbels and Semler were discussing what was happening because of the Holocaust. Gradually, the news about the Holocaust was leaking out, and it was becoming a public relations problem for Germany. Semler and Goebbels had a discussion what to do about it. And see, Semler explicitly brought up the Polish government in exile and its warnings. So Semler certainly did not think that what the Polish government in exile did for the Jews was unimportant or insignificant. He was very much significant. What to do about it? So what a supreme irony. The Nazi murderers actually have greater respect for Polish warnings than do today's Jews who smear the Poles and lie about them. Ironic. Okay, next slide. Okay, now, Jan Karski was known. He was traveled into various camps in Poland under auspices of the Polish underground, eventually traveled as a courier to West to warn about the Holocaust. He went to the United States to talk to top influential American Jews to try to do something to help about end the Holocaust. He tried to talk, as one of them, to Jewish Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter. But Felix Frankfurter would not believe him. So here Engel comes in, the historian David Engel, and begins slandering Jan Karski, putting him down, trivializing his act. He's diverting attention from what Felix Frankfurter. If David Engel is excited about something, he should be excited about Felix Frankfurter not believing Karski. That's what he should be excited. So what does Engel do? He launches a total attack on Karski, blaming him for something that had nothing to do with his mission. Accuses him, as always, of not talking about Polish collaborators. Well, hello. Karski was also silent about Jewish Gestapo agents, and Engel is not angry about that. He doesn't talk about that, like that. And then look at David Engel's argument is frankly stupid. He's saying that Polish collaborators were necessary in order for the Germans to find out who was Jewish or not. It's beyond ridiculous. Anyone with IQ above a peanut could tell a Pole from a Jew. The vast majority of Jews lived in segregated neighborhoods where they were easy to round up and pick up. Holocaust in Poland was a piece of cake. The Jews lived in segregated neighborhoods. All Germans had to do was round them up, or had the Jewish ghetto police round them up, put them on the trains to death camps. Simple. And lots of other ways you could tell. Well, we know the vast majority of Poland's Jews, though they lived in Poland for 700 years, they did not speak Polish. They spoke Yiddish and refused to learn Polish, with few exceptions. Very few Polish Jews then could speak fluent Polish. They could get away and pass as a Pole. Then, of course, Jews have physical features that differ them from other races. The most exaggerated one is the hooked nose. Jews have hooked noses, an extreme, but not necessarily, but a lot of them physically tell them apart. Then, of course, there's other things. Well, most Jewish men and boys were circumcised. So we had the pant drop test, drop your pants. I could easily tell who was a Jew and who was not. And of course, Jews did not know Christian prayers. At least not, most of them didn't, at least not fluently and without, when you're under pressure to recite a Christian prayer, to do it flawlessly and without hesitation, to pass for being a non-Jew. Most Jews could not do that, and so on. In fact, David Engel should read these two Jews, Shendi and Gat. They're both Polish Jews who masqueraded as Poles, and had a very hard time doing it. They describe how difficult it was. In fact, Gat, Ile Gat, he spoke perfect Polish. He had no Jewish facial features, and yet he said his Polish friends warned him that his body language gave him away that he was a Jew. That Jews commonly gesture with their hands when they speak, and that gave away the fact that he was a Jew. So you see how difficult it was for even any imbecile could tell the difference between a Pole and a Jew. you don't need Polish collaborators to tell the Germans who wasn't a Jew. Of course, this is not to say that it never happened, but it works both ways. The Germans also had Jewish Gestapo agents. They would often roam the streets. If they thought somebody was a fugitive Jew, they'd kind of suddenly say something in Yiddish and observe his reaction. So that's going to trap the Jews that way. And of course, Engel doesn't mention it. He just tries to change the subject from what Karski did, launch a cheap shot, a frivolous attack on him. And he's not the only one. Next slide. Okay, now the Ulma family saved and housed a whole bunch of Jews, and the Jews do the same trick. They try to change the subject from their heroism to some kind of an attack on Poland. They say at Markowa, there was also 24 Jews killed by Polish peasants. Not a shred of evidence behind it. It's pure hearsay. Then they do what I call the Jedwabne trick. It's the same incident, but the Jews replace the Germans with the Poles as the bad guys. Now, the German records say at Markowa, 33 Jews were shot by Germans, but the Jews totally twisted into 200 Jews slain by Poles. These are the kind of ungrateful tricks that Poles have to put up with. I personally will not, as much as I can do something about it. Okay, next slide.
So,
Okay.
Jan, in the next three slides, please provide three examples of how Holocaust devotees or the Holocaust establishment tries to control the narrative about Polish rescuers.
Okay, very easy. Okay, the Jews sometimes they reveal their motives. For example, Ukrainian historian Chiniewicz had private conversations with Jews why they were so against Jews, so against Ukrainians, of course, Poles, talking about rescuers of Jews. They say they want us to be talking, they want Poles and Ukrainians to be talking about their collaborators, the betrayers of Jews, not the rescuers of Jews. It was supposed to be a sacrificial model of Jewish memory that they espouse, demands that other nations must continuously atone for their involvement in the Holocaust. Really? It's obviously selective, it's phony, it's a game. It's a two-faced Jewish forgiveness. Jews are not that way to the Germans. If that was so, continuously atoning for their involvement in the Holocaust, Schindler would never have existed. It would have been unthinkable for the Jews to ever approve a positive movie about a German and Jews. You'll be rioting in the streets everywhere where there are Jews. Unthinkable if the name of the game is to actually atone for the involvement in the Holocaust. Germans are the ones that killed 6 million Jews. It's unforgettable and unforgivable, and the Jews would never allow Schindler to Schindler's List to see the light of day. But they didn't. They glorified him and said, so this is total hypocrisy. It's totally phony. Poles and Ukrainians, they want to make atone for trivial things during the Holocaust, and they nicely look away from the Germans who killed 6 million Jews. It's all peaches and cream between Jews and Germans. Jews often praise the Germans for their amazing repentance, which in a previous webinar I said was bunk, but that's what they do. The same with the Danes. They glorify the Danes and they nicely ignore Danish collaborators. The Danish Waffen-SS, which helps the Germans find the Jews who already had left through Sweden. There's also a Waffen-SS unit on the Russian front that directly killed Jews. But of course, the Jews turn a blind eye to that. They don't call on the Danes to keep atoning for it. They don't say, no, Danes should not be honored because they had collaborators. They never say anything like that. It's all phony. Okay, next slide. Okay, and there's more. There's also peer pressure involved, where Jews that are anti-Polish try to influence those Jews who are fair to Poles. Here's historian Szymon Redlik. I've reviewed a couple of his books. He's pretty good. He tries to be fair to Poles, or tries to be. And he talked about two Jewish sisters. Though they were rescued by Poles, they were not grateful. They still hated Poles, and they said, not to present the Poles in too favorable a way for the sake of our martyrs. Here, they're openly trying to influence this this positive Jew to not to write well about the Poles. But then they said something differently. I wonder what we could have done as potential rescuers. Good point. The question about how many Poles were saved by Jews. And again, this double standard, this dual morality, where a Jew does not have to risk his life to save a Goy, but a Goy is supposed to be required to risk his life to save a Jew. Dual morality. We then follow upon this touchy subject. Yeah, good choice of word, touchy subject. There are no such things as righteous Jews in that sense, in a sense of Jews having the duty to rescue other people, as in genocides, in war, and other comparable situations to the Holocaust. Then, of course, there's the famous case of Jerzy Kaczynski, the Levenkopf. It was not just ingratitude, it was a stab in the back against Poland. The Poles risked their lives to save Jerzy Kaczynski, and he had it pretty well. And he wrote this, did he write a book praising his rescuers, what they did? No, he wrote a book which is a pack of lies about Poles in Poland, how terribly the Poles treated them. For example, there's also anti-Catholic stuff. There's one about where he is in a story, he was during a mass, a religious service, he had a missile and he accidentally dropped it, and the Polish peasants grabbed him and threw him in a pit of manure about him. Such kind of lurid anti-Catholic bigotry. See, and that's what he did. He wrote all that. Oh, there's lies. I recently reread Kaczynski's Painted Bird. I thought I was reading Jan T. Gross. Jan T. Gross, decades later, has resurfaced the same lies as Jerzy Kaczynski did, and brought them all up and brought them back to the fore and got a lot of publicity for these lies. This all goes back to Kaczynski. Even better, Jerzy Kaczynski's father, Moishi Levenkopf, his gratitude toward Poland, he stabbed them in the back. He joined the communist security forces involved in the torture and murder of Poles. That's the kind of gratitude we get from the Jews. Yep. Next slide. Okay, now there's an exception that proves the rule. A Jew who tried to really help the Poles and got a tremendous amount of flack from Jews who were anti-Pole, which is the majority, as we shall see. Zygmunt Rolat was a Polish Jew. He came to America. He got rich. He put his money where his mouth is. He expressed his gratitude towards the Poles. He helped fund the Polin Museum. He wanted to fund the building of a statue near the Polin Museum to honor Polish rescuers of Jews. And right away, the Jews locally and in Poland raised a big stink about it. Well, there already are monuments to Polish rescuers of Jews. Why do we need another one? Oh, really? Well, there's Holocaust museums all over the world, and I never hear a Jew questioning, why do we need another one? That's how it is. And then Jews raised a big stink that the Poland museum's the site of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. It's a Jewish space, really a Jewish space. In what sense? Like a Jewish cemetery, maybe? No. Rolat saw through all this. He fought. He's the one good Jew, the exception that proves the rule. He fought these anti-Polish Jews for years. Unfortunately, he died, and so they won in that way. No such monument was built. But Rolat saw pretty ill-reached. The real reason the Jews don't want a monument there, they don't want Polish rescuers to be visible. If a monument was built some miles away, it won't get as much publicity. It won't share publicity with the Jews. That's what they're upset about. They don't want to share publicity with anybody else. As I mentioned in my previous webinars, the Jews regularly do this. They want a separate and unequal situation. They don't want a joint monument to Jewish and non-Jewish victims. They want a monument to be only to themselves, so they get all the attention, and then there can be monuments to other people, but of course they'll never get nearly as much attention or publicity as the monument to the Jews' Holocaust. That's the whole idea. Same with Holocaust education. Jews don't want their sufferings to be mentioned along others. They want to be all in a class by itself, all special, to get all the attention. And maybe if there's a little bit of class time, some other victims of the Nazi Germany will be mentioned. This even extends to Holocaust tours. I've read about a lot of Jews are complaining about these Holocaust-related trips to Poland. They are complaining that Poles are making money off the Holocaust. Oh my goodness. And all the money that the Jews made off the Holocaust. It's like Jews are higher beings. They have a right to make money off the Holocaust, but Poles and other people don't. Or for 700 years, the Jews have been making money off the Poles. And now, for once, there's a little bit of a role reversal, and Poles get to make such money from the Jews. And the Jews are freaking out. It's like the Jews are above us. The Jews have a right to make money off us, but heaven forbid that Poles ever make money from them. Now, something else Zygmunt Rolat did. He pointed out positively that Polish rescuers are just as important as Jewish Warsaw Ghetto fighters. Heresy! The Jews think they're in a class by themselves. They are not. He equated the Poles and the Jews in that area. They're just as important. This Jewish space business is a crock of baloney. There it is. So one exception, a Jew who did the right thing, and he got a lot of flack, a lot of grief, under peer pressure he faced from all these Jews trying to successfully prevent him from setting up a monument of remembrance to Pope. Bless his heart, bless his soul. I wish there was more like him. Next.
So, Jan, two questions for the next three slides. First, you've confirmed that Holocaust devotees do try to demean Polish rescuers who deserve to be recognized, and you also show that these devotees make a special effort to honor undeserving rescuers of Jews. Please give us some present-day examples of this. And then second, as you mentioned, there's also the case of Jews honoring the Danes for their supposed heroic rescue of Jews. Please explain why this is not factual.
Okay, let's look at Google. Who gets more of the attention? Danes in the Holocaust get almost 4 million mentions. Oscar Schindler, we shall see totally undeserved, it's 3.6 million. What about the Polish rescuers? The best one known is probably Irina Sendler. She gets 5 times less mentions than Danes in the Holocaust. Alexander Lados, who we said saved more Jews than Schindler, gets over 100 times less attention than does Schindler. What a travesty, what a farce. That's how it is. Żegota, one-of-a-kind Polish rescue organization for the Jews, gets 11 times less mention than Danes in the Holocaust. See? Total farce. Next slide. Okay, now all this business about Danish rescue of Jews. The Danes, Jews glorify the Danes all the time. I've seen it. I've heard decades ago, Ann Landers, the newspaper comedy, she's a real epiletterer, she's Jewish. And she said, the Danes are an amazing people. Oh, really? Amazing indeed. And there's not just Holocaust exhibits and Holocaust museums feature the Danish rescue of Jews, so-called rescue of Jews, but so do maritime museums. That's how it's been popularized, and it's a lot of bunk. Look at it closely, and it turns out the Danes did not rescue the Jews. The Germans released the Jews while pretending they weren't. Okay, so that way the Germans could save face and maintain their propaganda that they're out to kill all Jews, where really they let the Danes ship the Jews to, and they did it. How can we prove that? Well, first of all, start with common sense. The Danes had several weeks of time to get the Jews on board on wooden boats, fishing boats, and ship them 3 miles to Sweden. This was not one free crossing, hundreds of crossings over a 2-month period. Now, we're supposed to believe that the Germans were so stupid, they never caught on to the fact that Danes were taking their Jews to the coastal area and loading them on a boat. And Danes were so Germans were so stupid that they never figured out right in front of their noses that over a 2-month period, the Danes are shipping Jews to Sweden. And the Danish Navy was so incompetent, it couldn't do anything about, was totally stymied by a bunch of Danish fishing boats. I mean, ridiculous, but that's what we're supposed to believe. It says not a single boat carrying Jews was seized or sunk by the German Navy. Now, if the Germans were serious about killing Jews, let alone all Jews, like the Holocaust, the proponents keep telling us all the time that the Germans were trying to kill all the Jews, and that's totally untrue. Hitler, for example, released Jews for money, things like that. If that were true, very simple. The Germans could have said, all right, all Danish boats must stay in Danish water. Any Danish boat caught out in the open water will be blown out of the water, no questions asked. But that's not what happened. The Germans did not interfere. Even in German-occupied Denmark, there was no effective German hindrance. It was not difficult or dangerous for Jews or James to save them. And why did it even take a few weeks? It wasn't because of German interference of any kind. It was because the Danes argued with themselves about what to do, and the Danes wanted money to ship their Jews to Sweden. See? It proved difficult to find fishermen willing to make the short trip. Many hesitated, some refused, and those who agreed demanded considerable sums of money. That's why it took 2 months to ship. While the Germans just sat on their cans and pretended that nothing was going on. On average, 1,000 kroner was paid per person, the equivalent of 3 months' earnings of a skilled laborer. See, I guess the Danes were not quite so heroic at all. It was a totally artificial situation that enabled the Danes to pretend to be rescuing the Jews, while the Germans knew all along what was going on, but pretended not to see. Okay, and it shows them once again the Yad Vashem fraud and the fraudulent attack on Jan Maletka for taking money, allegedly, even though no evidence for that, it's propaganda, allegedly taking money for bringing water to the Jews of Treblinka. You see, the Danes were paid, and yet Yad Vashem doesn't care. Yad Vashem will disqualify any Polish rescuer who took money for saving Jews, but they don't disqualify the Danes individually or collectively for taking money to sending Jews, shipping Jews to Sweden. Jan Grabowski has really especially raised a big stink about Poles taking money for saving Jews. Total phony indignation. There's no such indignation about the Danes. Danes are just glorified. They're an amazing people. We hear it all the time. That I see it in the Holocaust literature all the time. Danes were the only people in Europe who saved their Jews. Amazing. What a crock of baloney, but that's how it is. That's the Holocaust establishment. That's the propaganda line. Now, then let's look on the bottom. Well, it's difficult to believe because, again, we were pounded into our heads that final solution means extermination. Now, actually, the term final solution was first mentioned by the Nazis in 1936, about 5 years before they began systematically killing Jews. At that time, final solution meant the Jews would be expelled from Europe, or they would all be rounded up and settled somewhere like in Madagascar, or maybe in eastern Poland, Lublin land, things like that. So final solution meant something drastic and unprecedented done to European Jews. It did not mean physical extermination until much later. Then about 1941, that's when the Germans began systematically killing Jews. And the argument is made on Nazism became more and more radical towards the Jews. And so at first it was possible that the Jews could still live, they could be resettled somewhere. But after about 1941, the Nazism became so radical, the only thing that could happen to the Jews was death. That's also fallacious. Even at the height of the Holocaust, Hitler personally approved for the release of some Jews for money, as I talked in my previous webinar. And in fact, some scholar Weisberg recognized the fact that even when extermination began to happen, it still was possible for Jews to be expelled if Jews weren't, so it didn't happen. but they could have, a significant number of Jews could have been expelled by Germany instead of being exterminated. Adolf Eichmann made a series of tapes in the late 1950s when he was in Argentina. At that time, he was not being searched for, prosecuted. He spoke his mind. He took unstinting credit that he killed 6 million Jews, and he only regretted that it wasn't more. And he talked about the Hungarian Jews. Now, Hungary then was under German occupation. Nearby Romania was not. And so he said, if a Hungarian Jew escapes to Romania, he is considered solved. So in other words, in Eichmann's thinking, final solution included expulsion. If a Jew somehow can leave Nazi-held territory, he's considered solved. And that's how it was. And finally, author Stauber openly said what I've been saying all along, that the Danes were deliberately freed. The Germans pretended to kill Jews, but really looked the other way. For the most part, there was some token opposition, but other than that, nothing. Basically, they let the Jews go. So the Danes did not rescue their Jews. They didn't think they rescued their Jews because they knew over a 2-month period that the Germans are not going to sink any boats. So the Danes realized they were in no danger, that the Germans are not going to do anything. The Germans are just going to play dumb and look the other way. So it was not a rescue of Jews. Let us look a little bit further at this. Next slide. Okay, this is where we are. Constant double standards by the Holocaust establishment. Yad Vashem has freely credited the entire Danish nation for saving Jews. Well, how many Danes were actually involved in sale? Maybe 1%. That's what Paulson quoted. 1%, that's roughly the same as Polish rescuers were. Yet Danes get sweeping praise that as a nation, they saved Jews. That's a total crock. Even more ironic and discriminatory, they use the same opposite argument against the Poles. Every time the Poles set up a monument for Poles who saved Jews, the Jews start complaining, oh no, Poles are claiming national credit for saving Jews. Poles are claiming that as a nation they saved Jews. Baloney, it's a total lie. Nothing of the sort. No Pole ever claimed that Poles as a nation saved Jews. He always said heroism must be exceptional, so only a tiny fraction of Poles were actually rescuers. Poles never claimed that the entire nation, Polish nation, saved Jews. Yet the Jews lie and keep saying that they do, while glorifying the Danes, giving them the credit as an entire nation for saving Jews, even though they most certainly did not. Well, why so much on the Danes? I believe it's a moral club. The Jews can use it to hit other people. Like when they say all the time, oh my goodness, the Danes are the only people who saved the majority of their Jews, implying that other European nations, especially Poland, are not as good because they did not save a majority of the Jews. Of course, they attacked Poland. I've seen attack directly. Look at that. The Danes saved 99% of their Jews, and the terrible Poles, they only saved 1% of their Jews. What a crap. Poland is a whipping boy. So it's a new weapon, weaponized Danish, so-called Danish rescue is weaponized to whip Poland, other nations, and then to whip Poland. Then there's the aspect of sensationalism, because it's been said the Danish rescue of Jews, it's a Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale. That's exactly what it is, but a fairy tale in a negative sense. The sensationalize the Holocaust and make it more popular by making up this tale about Danes bravely shipping their Jews to Sweden, even though the Germans looked the other way. Then there's another factor to consider: Jewish prejudices against Christians. Danes are probably the least Christian people in Europe. They're the most secular. So it sounds like maybe the Jews would rather glorify the Danes because they're not religious than they would the deeply Catholic Poles. Another irony when it comes to Oskar Schindler, the Jews would rather glorify a German creep and womanizer. Schindler was a lifelong womanizer. Then they would say a Catholic nun who saved Jews. That they would not glorify. Well, let's look at some numbers. A lot of Jews. Well, Danes were not anti-Semitic like Poles, and that's entirely possible. it's very easy to be positive to the Jews when you're not affected by them. There was only 7,000 Jews in Denmark. There's very few of them, and there's fewer of them. They tend to mind their manners more when there's more of them. Poland had a huge and vocal Jewish population. Most Poles found the Jews very burdensome. Well, that's how it was. It was numbers. It was partly by numbers. Then, of course, they had 3 miles to Sweden to ship them. Poland was landlocked. She couldn't even send 10 people to Sweden, probably, if she tried. And, of course, the German hindrance, German occupation of Denmark was practically nil. And you had a crushing German occupation of Poland that included the death penalties. The two cases are not remotely comparable, but the Jews do it and use the Danes as a club against the Poles. That's how it is. A fraud. Next slide.
So yeah, these are the last 2 slides. So please explain why all the hype surrounding Oskar Schindler is completely undeserved and how he saved his Jews in order to save and serve himself.
Okay, all this business about him, Schindler being a rescuer, a disinterested rescuer of Jews, total nonsense. If you do some research, you find it was very common for the Germans, the German factory owners, workshop owners, and the Jews to form a symbiotic relationship, a codependency. See, that happened not just for Schindler, but even much further east, like in the Kovna Ghetto, hundreds of miles east where Schindler was. Over time, the Jews and the local Germans discovered a common interest in protecting the workshops. It was a symbiotic relationship, a codependency. The Jews needed to buy time. The Germans preferred their comfortable billets in Kovna to the dangers of the front. That's just it. The Germans needed the Jews, and the Jews needed the Germans. It was not a rescue. Germans and Jews often got together to fix data. Schindler did that too, to falsify data to maintain the relationship. And what about those Germans who like Jews? Nothing. Some German officials treated the Jews humanely and did their best to help them, but that's not a rescue. That's a natural consequence of the master-slave relationship. Sometimes it's not rare for masters and slaves to become good friends, to become like a family. So it's not even if Schindler did genuinely like his Jews, that does not make him a righteous German, simply because it was a natural relationship that often develops between masters and slaves. Next slide. Okay, first of all, let's take another closer look at Schindler. Schindler was, before the war, he was in the Abwehr, the German intelligence agents. Now, that says something about him. In order to be accepted as a spy, you have to be naturally good at deceiving others and naturally good at pretending to be somebody that you're not. So Schindler was a con man. Now, when it came to actually, Schindler actually was involved in that German stunt at Gliwice, where there was a fake Polish attack on a German post, and that was used by Hitler to justify the invasion of Poland in 1939, beginning of World War II. So in that sense, Schindler played a major role in triggering World War II on Nazi side. He was not a good man. He was a con man. Okay, now, what about the Jews in his workshop, his factory? Schindler wasn't nice to Jews. He profited from them. Schindler bought a Jewish-owned factory for next to nothing, staffing it entirely with Jewish workers because their labor cost far less than that of Polish Gentiles. So it was all a question of money. Whether Schindler, the opportunist, the con man, he did whatever profited him the most, which was to have his Jews. And it doesn't matter if he actually personally liked Jews or not. The fact that he profited from his Jews and chose his Jews in order to profit from him disqualifies him as a righteous Gentile, according to the Yad Vashem standards, which, as we saw, are fraudulently applied. Polish rescuers that get paid are not accepted, not recognized as righteous Gentiles. But Schindler also profited from his Jews. But Yad Vashem just looks the other way, not only makes him a righteous Gentile, makes a big hero out of him, a moral exemplar, makes a huge movie from him, seen by hundreds, 400 million people so far. Now, it was actually very common throughout the war for these German businesses to keep their Jewish workers. And Schindler used to go to say, well, con man, well, these are essential workers. These Jews are essential workers for the war effort. Oh, yeah, sure. You know what? Other Germans, businesses said the same thing. Heinrich Himmler, he saw through it. Heinrich Himmler was evil, but he wasn't stupid. He knew a lot of German businesses were clinging to their Jews because they want to they don't want to turn their Jews over to be put to death. They want to keep their Jews so they could keep making money off them. Himmler wasn't stupid. He knew what was going on. Then, as the war was coming to an end, the Germans saved their own skin by saving their Jews. As I mentioned, to avoid going to the Russian front. They don't want their workshops closed, and then they'll be considered unproductive and sent to the Russian front. For example, another example of what I gave you before, the Kovna Ghetto, there was the Heinkel aircraft workshop near McDonald, well east of where Schindler was, that used make-work repairs. They pretended to fix things over and over again in order to be seen as productive, so that the shop isn't closed and Jews and Poles working there are not dispatched elsewhere. Now, Schindler himself, Amon Gotha, he was very evil, and Schindler's supervisor expressed fear of the Russian front, and one of Schindler's Jews told this to Schindler. So even if Schindler didn't know about this, he would have known about it right then. The Gotha and other Germans, whose owners are trying to save their Jews in order so that they don't get sent to the Russian front. And you look up Schindler's wife says on Google, because Schindler, she said that Schindler himself wanted to avoid the Russian front at all costs. So the game is up, but they don't recognize that the Holocaust establishment ignores all this and makes him a hero, heroic German, a good German. There was nothing of the sort. Not only that, now a lot of, when it comes to Polish rescuers, Jews are usually skeptical. It's a two-faced skepticism. Not only are they not skeptical about Schindler, they want to suppress any form of skepticism towards Schindler. See? Quote, negative words about Schindler's List, Steven Spielberg's Holocaust movie, are verboten in public company. They don't want it shown. See? So that's where we are. As I said before, this concludes my presentation. But as I said, Poles must Poles demand respect and Poles expect respect. Poles will not tolerate disrespect, which is what my spirit in making this webinar. Polska siła, Polish power.
Thank you. As we come to a close on our webinar, we at POSSA EDU thank you for your interest in each of our webinars. And Jan, thank you for sharing with us the reasons why the Holocaust establishment minimizes and dismisses Polish efforts to rescue Jews during World War II. The deliberate attempts, as you point out, by Yad Vashem and other Jewish authors to prevent general recognition of Polish efforts to save Jews are shameful. You've also explained the hidden meaning of righteous Gentile, and you've further shown us why honoring the Danes for their supposed heroic rescue of Jews and why the hype surrounding Oskar Schindler are completely undeserved. And so with that, Jan and I, we thank our viewers for your interest, and we bid you all do widzenia and goodbye.
Do widzenia.